Right, are you ready? Right, good morning. Welcome to this presentation for Adevinta for the second quarter. Welcome here to Oslo. There's a bit of a summer silence, but I know that many people are following us on the webcast. I'd like to remind you that we're also having a session conference call later in this afternoon. So, Uvashni Raman, our CFO, is here with me, and together we'll go through the highlights of the second quarter. I would say that the second quarter came in as expected. The important part for us, and where we're really focusing, is of course on the verticals. The core revenues from the professional customers of Adevinta, real estate brokers, car dealers, recruiters. And as you can see, those verticals, they continue to have a positive development, came in at the growth of 16%, where France and Spain is up 16%, and OLX Brazil is up then 33%. Then, what we have, as earlier advised, the display advertisement continues to be a volatile market. I think June was a bit slower than we expected in some markets. Could vary a bit from month to month, and that affects our total revenues, which then come in at 13%, and that is in line with what we've said previously. On the EBITDA, there's a positive development. You see that increases by 20%, up by 20% to 50 million euro, and that was then affected by a one-time charge of 5 million in Brazil. Now, in the fourth quarter, we adjusted the charge of the ESOP. Then, of course, later this year, we had the final results of Brazil for 2018, and those results turned out to be so good that the ESOP increased in value, and hence there is a charge of 5 million, which is one-off. And then I believe that the EBITDA development in total is actually very, very good. Then the global markets continue their development from previously with a positive development, whereas they used to lose money on aggregate, we now have a positive development there also in total profitability. All right, let me go through some of our main markets. So let's look at France. Well, France continued to do well in the verticals. And from what we can see, we continue to gain market shares in the important verticals, real estate and cars, also doing more and better in jobs now. Of course, it's the same thing here with the display advertising market. That could vary a bit from month to month. So June last year, 2018, was very strong in France in display ads. There was a World Cup, and France was doing very well. There were a lot of big campaigns going on that was not going on this year. So that is then a flattish development in display advertisements affecting the total picture. But the important part for me was that we continue to do well in our core verticals. And what I can say is that we are still doing a lot of product development, and you'll see more of that going forward as well. So more data-driven performance products for real estate brokers, for car dealers, and we'll be launching later this year a new, more premium design for Avant Louer. And we're also doing more in the new construction market. Then you have seen that the acquisition of Locasun and Paycar was announced a few weeks back. Locasun is, of course, our entry into the holiday market, where we already have a quite strong presence through leboncoin. And Paycar will specialize in the consumers buying cars. And will facilitate, introduce more safety for users. So that is a good thing. And I think this is in line with our strategy. We have said that we will continue to strengthen our positions in the markets that we are already strong and look for bolt-on acquisitions. And these are two examples of that. So I think you'll see that we'll continue to focus on those markets going forward. Then in Spain, there is a solid growth in all three verticals. I think the macroeconomic environment is, we're curious to see what will happen there, because this impacts our display advertisement in the second quarter. But still, we believe that given that what we're seeing so far from the jobs vertical looks good, and we've been doing well both in the cars and also doing more in real estate, where we're seeing that people like our sites, and we have good user intention and engagement in Fotocasa. We also mentioned that briefly, there is a price transparency tool. I think that's an example of what's important to do in the long run. So we have worked with all the car dealers, introduced a new car transparency tool so that our users can see very clearly what is the exact price, not including financing or any of those things. That's an example of things that's much easier to do for the users and providing more transparency. Whereas in the short run, some car dealers might not like it because it gives them not the same opportunities to introduce all the financing tools they have. But this is clearly something that's very good for the long term, and we're very happy to have that in place. All right, Brazil. Next, here I'd like to point out that when we're looking at Brazil, we have to bear in mind that the Q2 last year was exceptionally strong. That came as a result of the new financing market and the new deals with the banks that we had introduced that really started to accelerate. And so we're happy about the underlying development still in the verticals. There's here in the, I would like to point that out also, the display ads. That is affected by the macro environment in Brazil. We're seeing now that the macro forecast is around 1% growth in totality for Brazil. That's affecting the display ad market somewhat. So that is what kind of influences these figures for second quarter. The underlying growth in the verticals we are happy with. The financing marketplace for cars is working well. We'll introduce that also to the real estate market. In the real estate market, we have gained a lot of volume. We'll also introduce an insurance marketplace in the car vertical. Then, in Brazil, as in other, I would say, more emerging markets, we're doing a lot on the product sides for trust and safety for our consumers, so they should feel more safe when doing business and in our marketplaces. In the global markets, we continue to, it's a little bit the same story with the core verticals doing better than the overall growth. That means that the display ads market is not as strong as the core verticals. Core vertical is, of course, the most important for us. But here, we've been guiding, as you can see, the trend, the 3-year trend here is quite positive when it comes to total result, as we've communicated earlier. So this shouldn't come as a surprise, but rather a confirmation that we're here on the right track. Then a little bit about the global markets. So in the global markets, we're seeing that Italy is getting results now from the product developments they're doing in motors. So we're now launching also a roadshow for all the car dealers in Italy to show our products and how we can help them increase their leads. I would say that so far that has been well received. Willhaben has a good quarter where we're seeing in the important verticals, motor and real estate, double-digit growth in both of them. When it comes to Ireland, I would say that Daft, which is of course our real estate part there, continues to do well and has a high growth in the second quarter. I believe there's more to come there. We're also there launching new construction as a tool. In Hungary, we're not the leader in real estate, but we are by far the leader in motors and also doing well in jobs, and both those verticals continue to do well. Then on Shpock, we're getting ready for the first version of transactional products, kind of end-to-end, like we're already doing in France. So helping the consumers to take care of the whole transaction with payment and shipping. So you can sit in your home and do the transaction with someone sitting somewhere else, and you don't have to meet each other, but still everything in the transaction end-to-end is taken care of. So we're gearing up to launch that in the third quarter in Shpock. Then on the display ad markets, well, it's a competitive market. It's a tough market. There's no doubt about that. I think that's the only thing that we're not very happy about in our development. And what you've seen, say, post-GDPR, is that actually some of the big international giants have increased and strengthened their own market shares. Then I would say that there are some things, some special effects. So Q2 and especially June last year was very strong. We did introduce also something called first price auction bidding, which kind of is beneficial for the seller, but that gave us a boost last year and helped improve those numbers. What we are doing is that we're investing much more in educating our sales force, and we have reorganized it in France with now, in the second half of the year, starting now in July, a dedicated sales force working only towards the big agencies. There has also been some technology issues between our ad supplier and the other ad exchanges, and we're resolving that. So I think it's too early to say how everything would work out. We're seeing some cautiously positive things, so you can see that the advertising revenues did increase from the Q1 to Q2, so we're cautiously optimistic, but of course this is a volatile market. What we can do a lot about, and we're also doing, is product development. Here I'd like to highlight France, because this has been a very important quarter for France when it comes to product development. So we launched many new things to facilitate the experience for our users. So personal ads recommendation is now coming to everyone in France. So meaning that based on what we know about you, we can tailor the ads. User ratings and reviews have been introduced, of course, to introduce trust and safety. We also facilitated the communication between the sellers and the buyers. And we are then improving we have now launched shipment and payment, so that people from different parts of France can transact with each other without having to meet. We'll take care of the payment. We'll take care of the shipments. So that's important, and you'll continue to see us do more product development in France and other places. I mentioned some of the new things that we'll launch for the second half in the professional market, and we'll continue to invest in that. And then, of course, from our big sites, we also take that experience and use it and can roll out some of the same features in other markets. So we can see that the automatic ad moderation has been launched in Italy also now. We're constantly working on our algorithms. And then I would say that the trust and the fraud thing is important, especially in some of the more emerging markets. We're working with that, and we're quite happy with the rollouts that we're doing there. Right, I think that's it for the operational review. Then I think I'll leave it to you, Varshney, to go through the financials.
Thanks, Rolv Erik. On the financials, Rolv Erik has touched on a couple of the key elements of the financials, but just in summary, a solid performance for the financials for the quarter. Revenues up 13%, EBITDA 20%, and then we continue to build on the operating cash flow as the business has been mature. Yes, a quarter would, when compared to Q2 in 2018, some muted growth, but Q2 last year was quite a strong performing year quarter. And Rolf Erik has talked to some of the elements that drove that. But still, verticals really contributing to the upward movement within our revenues, and then, of course, muted a little bit by advertising. Just to unpack the revenues and EBITDA margins a little bit. As you can see, revenue growth, again, vertical uplift, advertising muted, although we do see some improvement, and we continue to put in place initiatives to increase that. On the EBITDA margin progression, happy with the 20%, 27%, but the ESOP coming out of Brazil was a once-off. It had a 5 million hour share impact. Normalized EBITDA then would have been at a 30% projection. So in line with our expectations and in line with where we project going forward on a longer term. We continue to focus, as I said, on cash generation. And of course, as you look at the EBITDA margins and the EBITDA in general, the operating leverage starting to come in. We see some cost optimization also coming in, which is really driving that EBITDA margin quite nicely. On our core classifieds, as we said, is a core driver. And you can see that we continue to contribute more and more to our revenues. Vertical growth up 15% on a net currency adjusted basis, 16% up. Display advertising up 1% compared to the previous quarter, quarter 2 2018. Of course, we had quite a tough quarter one for this year, with advertising down 5%. So the initiative starting to come in, which we're pretty happy about. This slide just shows you the contribution of a revenue from the different sites. As you can see, all our businesses contributing to the revenue adjustment. Of course, what really strikes me is global markets are really starting to make a contribution, really driving revenue through, and we're starting to see some of that benefit come through. On the EBITDA, again, global markets starting to contribute. We improved our EBITDA performance there compared to the first quarter, and basically quite an uplift from the previous quarter as well. What I just tried to do in the next couple of slides is just talk through the demerger impacts. As you know, in the first quarter, we hadn't put through the impacts of the demerger. This has now been put through the books. If you'll remember from the IPO documents or the listing documents, we said there would be quite a movement in terms of your net debt. Of course, I will call that out, and then I'll talk about equity on the next slide. The net debt dropped quite a bit. As we said, we would pay back the debt that we had with Schibsted, and then we drew down on our revolving credit facility, and that number at 151 is effectively what we speak to. On the equity, and the next slide, as we said, and in line with what we said, the capital increase will be around 144 million. That has come through at 144 million. So all the impacts of the IPO and the demerger has been affected in the books, and we're pretty comfortable that they reflect the right amounts right now. I think the digital tax in France, has caused some confusion. So I'd just like to outline this. There are two elements with the digital tax in France. One is, do we meet the threshold or not? As you know, Adevinta France, or Adevinta as a standalone, does not meet the first threshold, which is the 750 million revenues. So what happens is, because Schibsted owns the majority stake in us, we have to include the revenue of Schibsted in that. Although we include the revenue of Schibsted in there, remember this tax is only ascribed to the revenues in France, which will be our Leboncoin and France assets. The reason why we believe there's still some uncertainty is that it's still very unclear as to exactly which revenue will fall within that. We do believe that some of our revenue is not included within the definition. Guidelines are going to come out soon, now that the Senate has approved this, which will be able to clarify further exactly the classification of revenue. If we meet the threshold, firstly, and then the tax applies to us, we will then have to determine what within the taxable income we would ascribe to this tax. As you know, the revenue in France for us is around 300 million. And on a 3% of that, you can get to the top end of that. We still believe that there is some adjustment to do. We will continue to engage with the authorities to understand and define that, and we'll probably be able to provide an estimate, a more clearer estimate around that before the first payment that needs to be made in November. The range can be between 4 million and 9 million euros, depending on how the classification occurs. So that is about the maximum we anticipate at this point in time. We have made no provision for that in our books, as the tax wasn't enacted as at our balance sheet date. And the other element of it was because the estimate hasn't been clearly defined yet, and we couldn't define it clearly, we haven't put that as part of a post-balance sheet event either. And that's it for me, rounding up, a pretty solid set of financial performance for the quarter and continue to stand in line with our longer-term goal and margins as well. Thank you very much. Rolf Erik?
Thank you. Well, just like to kind of round it off here by looking ahead. I mean, we're quite happy with what we're seeing in our operations, the way that our products are developed and the way we work with our professional customers. And I think you would see us continue to develop our positions, and both through organic growth, but also at inorganic opportunities that we're watching and pursuing, mainly in our core markets, such as I mentioned in France already, but we're looking in different countries. We maintain our guiding to the medium to the long term, and as you have seen, the development in the verticals is quite solid, and I expect that to continue also for going forward. The display ad market is, of course, somewhat more volatile, but we're looking at, we're seeing some cautiously positive things, and we're working on resolving some of those tech issues, and also having an even better dialogue with our customers through the reorganizations. So and then we'll continue on what I see as a steady path to continue in the verticals, both in our big market, but also more in the emerging markets. And of course, we'll continue to invest in product development. That's the key for the long-term positive development in providing leads to our customers. So basically, I think this is a good quarter, and we see we're confident when looking ahead, especially with our core business, which is then the further development of the verticals. Right, I think that's it from us. And then, Uvashni, if you'd like to come back up here, then let's do a Q&A. In case there are any questions. Yes, here's the question.
Thanks. Oliver Pisani, Nordea. Previously, you have been talking about coming in slightly below guidance on H1 when it came to revenue growth. But now I can't see that you're guiding anything for H2. So should we interpret that as you expect to be within the guidance range of 15% to 20% for H2?
I think the way you should interpret it is that what we normally do is that we have this medium to long-term guidance, which is 15% to 20%, and that's also what we're maintaining. Normally, we don't guide on a quarterly basis or a half a year. We're saying what we think is a realistic medium to long term, and so I think it was kind of an exception we made for the first half connected to the IPO. So we're not doing quarterly guidance, but we're maintaining our medium to long term.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Anything on the webcast here, Christian?
Yeah, we have a few questions from the webcast. There was a increase in capex up to 13.2 million euros. Can you comment a bit on the increase there, and what should we expect going forward there?
Yeah, so effectively, there were two elements of the capex. One was, the continued growth within our technology and product and tech relevant to the previous quarter, so the Q on Q increase, and that will continue to happen. The other element is that we also, continue to. We did a bit of the transaction. We had some of the transaction impacts on the capex for this year, but we do not expect capex to increase on such a large basis going forward. We've given a guidance on capex previously in the IPO documentation, and we expect that to be in line with that.
Okay, there's a couple of clarification questions around the ESOP charge in Brazil. One question is the charge correlated to the performance, and is it therefore a chance it might impact future profits? And secondly, I think you touched upon it, but maybe reiterate the bridge up to the 23% underlying EBITDA margin,
sure.
to make it clear.
So as you can understand, in 2018 was quite an outlier year in terms of the Brazilian. So every year we do a fair value adjustment on the ESOP. And based on that element of it, we've now adjusted the forward-looking. It's a 10-year view on the fair value adjustment that we do in Brazil. And we've now accounted for the material improvement in the business up until 2018 and the forward look on that, which is on an expected percentage increase, which was quite a drastic improvement from Q17 or the year 17. What we would expect to do on the ESOP is to do a more rigorous review now on a more frequent basis to ensure that we've got that in line when we don't have unexpected large movements for the market, and we don't anticipate having these really drastic moves based on the longer term view. Of course, things can move either way as well. The second part of the question, sorry, Christian.
No, I think that was
it's all
anyway covered. Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
There's also some questions more on the operations in Brazil. The revenue growth went down a little bit. Can you say anything about the share of display advertising revenue there, how important that is in the total, and how do you feel about the whole market situation going forward in Brazil?
I think that for the display ad market, that has been growing up to the first quarter, and then there was a dip in the second quarter. I think that was affected by a slower macro and some advertisers pulling back their money. Also, the same that you've seen in Europe, that some of the giants are strengthening their position. I think when it comes to the verticals, which is the most important part, we continue to do well. And I think especially on the car business, I would say money supermarket that we're having there and the cooperation with the big banks is turning out very successful. That's why we're going to introduce it also in the real estate sector. And we're also looking at doing an insurance market for cars. So we're happy about that. Then I think for the display, that's kind of affecting our numbers this week. I expect it to be better going forward than this quarter, which I think was weak. But it's the main businesses that we're most happy with.
There's one little bit broader question. Facebook is to be fined, I think it is $5 billion for privacy violations. Do you think this could change anything in relevant display advertising markets?
I think that's, this just came out before the weekend. So I think it's too early to say how that will affect it. I think it's, in general, I would say that it's good that the authorities are following up on the big companies. But I think it's too early to make a prediction for how that will affect the advertising market. Right. One more question there from the webcast.
Yeah, there's one more here we can take in the end here. We have a question regarding France. Can you say anything about the competitive environment there within real estate specifically?
I think the French real estate market is doing well, and what we're seeing is that the number of transactions has gone up, and that's of course a good driver for our site. And I think then that's general positive also for the market and our competitors. And what we can see is we're quite happy with the development that we're having, and we're seeing that the combination of Le Bon Coin and avant-vente is quite powerful. So from our numbers, what we're saying is that we're gaining market share. So we're happy both about the total market development in real estate in France and also about our own position.
Okay, there's one more came in now regarding second-hand car transactions, where statistics were down year on year in France and Spain. Do you have any comments on the market developments there, and do you have any color on the trends in more on a macro market perspective?
I think it's a bit early to say. What we've seen is there's been a little bit slower new car sales in Spain this second quarter. That could potentially, of course, affect the second-hand market as well. But I think it's a bit early to say, and we'll watch that development going further. But as I said, in France, there are diverging signals where the real estate market continues to be extremely strong. All right. Then it looks like we've been able to answer those questions on the webcast and also here in the room. So then I would like to thank you all very much for coming and remind you that there's a telco call, conference call, also this afternoon. So thanks a lot for coming.